Today's daf is daf Yud, and we'll start with Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, the beginning of the sugya. The Gemara is going to bring a statement from which we derive the heter bamos even after Churban Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Shamati Shemakrivim beBeis Chanya. We can bring karbonos from my Rebbeim beBeis Chanyo in the mizbeach that was built by Chanyo, who's the son of Shimon HaTzadik Mitzrayim. The Gemara has actually a machlokas elsewhere in Masechet Menachos as to whether or not Chanyo was L'Shem Shamayim or not. But here we're assuming he was L'Shem Shamayim, so it's not a binyan that was designated for Avodah Zarah, and therefore, Bizman Hazeh, even in this time after Churban Beis Hamikdash, we can bring a carbon in Beis Chanyo. Beis Chanyo was certainly in Chutz La'aretz, and it's a bama. Kasavar, apparently Rabbi Yitzchak holds Beis Chanyo, Lav Beis Avodah Zarah. It was built by Chanyo L'Shem Shamayim. There's no Islu to be makriv there. And this is a reflection of the Shita Rabbi Yehuda Menachos. Rabbi Meir disagrees. He holds that Chanyo built the mizbeach for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, and therefore for sure it would be Otzar Olonis for all time to be makriv. That we're holding now like Rabbi Yehuda. And in addition, the Kasavar Kedusha Rishona Kitchel Chaitam Lo Kitchel Atzad. So whatever David and Shlomo did in order to generate Kedusha for Yerushalayim and Beis Hamikdash, that was meaningful and effective as long as the Beis Hamikdash was standing. But after it was destroyed, and you no longer have what's called Kedushas Mechitzos, maybe we'll talk about that later, then the Kedusha itself is Betela. And therefore, if the Kedusha is Betela, it's no longer valid, it's void, then you could be Makriv Karbonos on Bamos. There's a heter Bamos. There's a whole long discussion here, which I'm not going to get into now, about exactly when Rabbi Yitzchak lived. Did he live when he said Bizman Hazeh at the time of Beis Chanyo? Beis Chanyo had been destroyed hundreds of years earlier. And anyway, in Tichsiv, with regard to Heter Bamos, the Torah says, Ki lo vasem adota el hamenucha vel hanachla. Pasuk Parshas Re'eh. And the Gemara is now going to darshan this pasuk. When the people of Israel crossed the Jordan River and they were makriv on Bamos. And the Torah says you could be makriv on Bamos because lo bas marati, you haven't yet come to Menucha Nachla. What's Menucha? Menucha zu Shiloh. Nachla zu Yerushalayim. So in other words, you're allowed to be makriv karbonos on Bamos as long as the Mishkan wasn't established yet in Shiloh and the Beis Hamikdash was not built in Yerushalayim. And this pasuk sets up a hekech, makich nachala lemenucha. Ma menucha yesh achra heter, just like in the case of Shiloh. After the Churban of Shiloh, there will be a heter bamos. And as far as Shiloh is concerned, there's no din of Beis HaBechira, that it was chosen and generated an Iser of Bamos Li'olam. It's only while you have the Mishkan standing in Shiloh. But after it's Churban, it's mutter to bring Karbanos on a Bama. Af Nachla, by virtue of this analogy, even Yerushalayim, Yeshach Heter, after the Churban, you could be Makriv Karbanos on Bamos. And therefore, Bizman Hazeh, after Churban Abayis, you're permitted to be Makriv Karbonos on Bamos, like for example, Beis Chanyo. Again, assuming that it wasn't built for the purpose of Avodah Zarah. Amrulei. So they asked Rabbi Yitzchak the following question: Amrit, you've established that you're allowed to be makriv and Beis Chanyo Bizman Hazeh. Isn't that so? Did you make this statement? They wanted to clarify whether Rabbi Yitzchak in fact made such a statement. Amalahu, and Rabbi Yitzchak responded, "Lo, I never said it." Amar Rav Elokim, I'll take a shvua. Amra, Rabbi Yitzchak said it. Ugmirna la minei, and we learned it from him. So it means that Rabbi Yitzchak must have rescinded his original position. Why did he change his mind? Mishum Kash Rabbi Mori. The most Rav Mori had a question on Yitzchak. Is it possible that after the Churban Abayis he would be allowed to be Makron Bomos? The Mishnah tells us, our Mishnah here, Kedusha Shivo, Yeshach Re'el Heter. Only in the case of Shiloh, after the Churban, the Kedusha of Shiloh is gone, and you're allowed to be Makron Bomos, but Kedushas Yerushalayim, like this, Einach Re'el Heter. The Odin, furthermore, this time we have a Mishnah in Zvachim Kufyud Beis, Mishabol Yerushalayim, once Shlomo Melech built the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, Nesra Bomos, and that means forever and ever. There would never be a heter to bring on Bomos once Shlomo Melech built the Beis Hamikdash. So even with the Churban Beis Hamikdash, there would still be an Iser Bomos, because now Mokom Hamikdash is called Mokom Asher Yivchar Hashem. Vehi and Yerushalayim Oisel Nachla. This is the Nachla that's mentioned in that pasuk that we quoted earlier from Parshas Re'eki, Lovosam and Atal and Nachla. In any event, for these Mishnayos, it's explicit that there's no heter lahakir bamos b'zman hazeh, and therefore Rabbi Yitzchak rescinded his original position. But the Gemara says that his original position is really one shita of Tanoim, because this whole issue about whether Kitcha Rishona, Kedusha Rishona is Kedusha l'shayt v'Kitcha l'tzalom or not is machlokas Tanoim. Tanoim is the first Kedusha that was generated at the time of Shlomo at the building of Beis Hamikdash. Is it liyasid lavo or not? Does it only continue to exist as long as the bias stands, but not after the Churban? The Snan, we learned in a mission in the 8th parak of Edios, Omer Abelazar, Shamati, Shayubonim Behechal, when in the Beis Hamikdash, now we're talking about during the time of Ezra, they built the second Beis Hamikdash, and they built a Hechal. You osim kloim are curtains, as a mechitza lehech. So this would define the makom of the heichal by creating these ksalim. Again, these weren't stone walls, but they were curtains, and they were set up even before the bayis was built. And later on, they surrounded these kloim with ksalim, with actual walls. And the same thing they did not only to the Heichel, but also to the Azara outside the Heichel. Asu kloim la'azara, when they were building the wall around the Azara, the Chomas Azara, they first built kloim. They set up these curtains. However, there's one difference. Ela shebeheichal, with regard to the Heichel, they set up the kloim on the inside, the tzad pnimi of the makom haksolim, and then bonim mibachutz. In other words, the way that they built it was they wanted the bonim, those who were in charge of building, to be outside the makom hechal. They should enter into the hechal. So therefore, they set up the kloim first on the tzad pnimi of the makom haksolim, and then they built the ksolim. And the opposite is true in the case of the Azara. The Azara, in that case, they set up the kloim on the tzad chitzoni of the makom hachom, on the outside, not on the inside, on the outside. And then inside the kloim, in the Azara itself, they would build the choma, the wall that surrounded the Azara. And the reason for this is that the kloim become a chatzitza between the Azara and the chutz. Now the Mishnah continues and says, "V'yomer Rabbi Yoshua, shamati shemaktivim af al pishin bayis," that we can bring karbonos in the makom hamikdash even if the bayis is no longer standing, which means that the ksolim of the Beis Hamikdash fell, and furthermore, ochlin kodshei kodshim, inside the Azara we can eat kodshei kodshim af al pishin kloim, even if the mechitzos that surround the makom Azara fell, And you can eat kachim kalam Masechet Yerushalayim afal pi shein choma. Even if the choma that surrounds Yerushalayim has fallen, nevertheless, we can still eat kachim kalam and Masechet mishum shekedusha rishona kitchel l'shaita v'kitchel liyasid love. That the kedusha is not bottled even after churban, whether it be churban here, in the case of eating kachim kalam Masechet Yerushalayim, the case or churban beis hamikdash, as far as eating kachim. Now, this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that kitcha l'shaita v'lo kitcha l'asla. The last opinion is that of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua holds kedusha rishona kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha l'asla. He's coming to argue against Rabbi Eliezer. Apparently, Rabbi Eliezer held that kedusha rishona kitcha l'shaita v'lo kitcha l'asla. And since kedusha rishona was batla, you can no longer be makriv there. So in order to sanctify the place, the chadash, from scratch, you have to establish a mizbeach in a place which is called Pesach Ol Moed, and therefore they had to put up the kloim, the curtains, in the place of Koslei Ahech in order to sanctify the Azorah. And once they did so, they were machshir for Akrovas HaKorbanos, even prior to the finishing and the completion of the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, the building of the Beis HaMikdash. That's all true according to Rabbi Eliezer. Whereas according to Rabbi Yeshua, kitcha rishona kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha l'asla. So there's no need to sanctify the area with a new kiddush to mekadesh l'makom michadash. So we see clearly that there's a machlokes tanoim with regard to kiddusha rishona, whether it's kitcha l'asla or kitcha l'shaita. And therefore, Rabbi Yitzchak, in his original opinion, that kitcha l'shaita below kitcha l'asla is reflecting that opinion amongst the tanoim of Rabbi Eliezer. Amalei Ravina l'Ravash, Amalei Ravina l'Ravash. And we're trying to clarify Rabbi Eliezer. Mimai. How do you know that there is a machlokes? Dilma, perhaps kuli alma. I could be argumentative, and I can assume that both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua agree that kedusha rishona kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha l'asla. Umar my shmilei ka'omar, umar my deshmilei ka'omar. Each one was projecting and transmitting what he heard from his Rebbeim. Rabbi Yeshua is not coming to argue with Rabbi Eliezer because the din of Rabbi Eliezer is not based on the fact that you need a new kiddush. It's not because hutzchu lachzor lekadesh. So then you'll ask me, if even Rabbi Eliezer adopts the shita of kitcha rishona kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha l'asla, why is Rabbi Eliezer going through this whole rigmarole of how to set up the curtains and the mechitzos of the kosel? Why don't you just be makriv of the carbon without kloim? It has already its kedusha. Even if the kloim are down, we don't have to go back and re-sanctify the area. The original sanctification is still valid. And the Gemara answers l'tznius of the alma. The only reason why Rabbi Eliezer sets up this kloim is not for a kiddush, but rather for tznius. That the makom kodesh should not be parut, it should not be golui, it should be in private. Now we have to know that the Mishnah in Erechim on Daf Lamed Beis has a list of cities, and the Mishnah establishes that those cities are Mukafos Choma Mimos Yeshua ben Nun, and that generates a special status as far as Batei Ori Chom is concerned. In the parasha at the end of Sefer Vayikra, and if you sell karka, your own private real estate, in a city that was walled from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, you have a full year to be goel the sada and to, in effect, terminate that mechira and get back your field. And our Gemara is going to bring various brisos that deal with that Mishnah in Erechim to try to prove that the Tanoim that learned, that were expressing their opinions, respectively, are divided on this issue. Machlokes here is going to be about Kedusha Rishon Kitchel Shaita, Kitchel Asid Lavo, or Lo Kitchel Asid. Elaki Hani Tanur. So if you weren't satisfied with the previous brisa, I'm going to bring you, or the Mishnah Evios actually, I'm going to bring you another brisa. The sign you learned to the brisa, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi. We'll soon see if it's really Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi, but right now that's the transmission. Lama Manu Chachamim. Why did the Mishnah enumerate in Erchin, Dafka Es Elu, these 9 cities are listed by name as those that have Mukefes Choma, Bimos Yoshua. And therefore, each bias within those 9 cities has the status of Batei Ari Choma with those dinim. There are other cities, many other cities that were Mukefes Choma. And the Mishnah itself says at the end, V'chol Kayotzim. But rather, Kisha'olu B'nei Agola, when the B'nei Agola came up from Bavel, at the time of Ezra, Matzu es Elu v'Kitchu. They encountered these 9 cities, and they sanctified these 9 cities, and the ritual of sanctification is the subject of a sugya, Chvuas, Daf Yudalit, Shtei Todos, Shir, etc., etc. Aval Rishonos, the other cities that were also surrounded by a wall of protection before the Churban, Batlu Mishabatla Aretz. Those cities lost their Kedusha when the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael was Betela. And since they were not re-sanctified, we're not going to count them in the enumerated list of the cities that are included in the din of Batei Ari Choma. Alma Kasar Kedusha Rishona Kitchel Shaita V'Lo Kitchel. We see clearly that the author of this brisa maintains Lo Kitchel Asid Lavo, and therefore the cities that were surrounded by walls at the time of Yoshua lost their Kedusha, their status and sanctity with the Churban. Because if we were to hold, if we would maintain the view that Kitchel Shaita V'Kitchel Asid Lavo, then any city that was Mukefes Choma at the time of Yoshua would still retain its Kedusha even after Churban. And the Gemara now is going to ask a catch on this brisa from a different brisa. Rabbeinu, let's posit the following contradiction from a brisa that says, "Oh, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi." Again, we're assuming this is the same Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi that we had in the previous brisa. Is it true that only the 9 cities that are mentioned in the Mishnah Erchim, regard to cities that were conquered by Moshe Rabbeinu on the eastern side of the Jordan River, at the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, Shishim Ir Kol Chevel Argov. And we're talking about a cluster of cities in a certain area which numbers 60. Uksiv, and in the next pasuk it says Kol Ela Orim B'Tzuros Choma Gavoa. We see here that there were many, many other cities that were Mukafos Choma, B'Tzuros Choma Gavoa. So once again, we get back to our question: why is it that the Mishnah in Erchin lists those 9 cities? Why were these singled out? Because Kisha'ol B'nei Agola Matzu Elu V'Kitchum. They found only these 9 cities. All the other cities were completely wiped out. And now they would sanctify these 9 cities. So the Gemara stops midway in the middle of its discussion to try to clarify this brisa. I mean, the brisa says that Chazru V'Kitchum, Ashta or Amri Lo Tricha L'Kedusha. We're holding now that in addition to the Kedusha Rishona that was sanctified in its time, the brisa says that we don't need to be Mekadesh these ayoras the second time around. If we have Mesoris, that these are cities that were walled way back at the time of Yeshua ben Nun, then they have the status of Orei Choma, and their kedusha was never betela. So the Gemara clarifies, "Elamatzu es elu umina but rather what it means is they found these cities on their way, and mina'um. I'll read to you the translation of mina'um. He says, so for these many, many years that they were in the Golus, there was no din of Batei Arichom. Din Zev Yisrael. So they didn't need a re-sanctification because the original Kedusha was still intact. But rather they did so to speak, a ritual of Kiddush Hayoros in order to notify people about the din of Batei Arichom. This was like a public educational demonstration. We don't need to change the brisa, and the brisa as is fine, but we have to understand that the kiddush of these ayoros was not an actual ma'aseh kiddush, but rather was l'zecher b'alma. Ella mitzoes elu minah. Now the Gemara goes back to the brisa. The brisa says v'lo elu bilvad. Not only are these specific limited number of cities sanctified with the status of Arichoma, elakol shetalu lecha misoris biyadcha me'amosecha shahaisa mukefes chomi mos Yeshua ben Nun. If you have a misoris about a certain city that's now unwalled, but that it was once walled, and that wall was up surrounding the city at the time of Yeshua ben Nun, is then kol mitzvahs halolu nogim. All the dinim of an ir mukefes chomi mos Yeshua will apply based on that misoris. And we don't need a new kiddush. And all this is quoted in the name of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. We already had a statement of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi to the effect that kitchel shaita v'lo kitchel asid lavo. And the reason why the Mishnah in Erechim listed these 9 cities of Mukafis Choma is because there was a bittul kedusha, and once the kedusha was betela, they had to do a re-sanctification. So how do we reconcile that with this quote of Rabbi Shmuel? Gemara says, "Kashi Rabbi Shmuel." Here's a stira between Rabbi Shmuel as quoted in the first price, that kitchel shaita v'lo kitchel possible, as opposed to the second price that we just learned that is explicit in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, that kitchel shaita v'kitchel asid lavo. So first the Gemara answers Trey Tanoya Libi the Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi. The 2 traditions reflected by these 2 brisos respectively about what exactly is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi. Another answer is Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yossi Amar. We have a mistake in the transmission, and we're not talking about Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, but rather Rabbi Lazar or Rabbi Yossi. And therefore, in the original brisa, we're not relating this statement to Rabbi Shmuel, but rather to Rabbi Lazar. Tanya, now we're going to try to prove from a brisa that it's actually the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, that kitchel shayt rishona, kitchel shayt v'kitchel asid lavo. The Sanya Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi Omar, regard to the pasuk in Vayikra Chaf Hey Batei Orei Choma, it says v'kama b'ayis sheba'ir asher lo choma, and the word lo is written Lamed Vav Aleph. So why does it say with an aleph? Why not just lo? Afal pisha ein lo achshav So it's low with an aleph. It doesn't have a choma now, but low with a vav, it is considered as if it has a choma, even though now it doesn't have in reality a choma, because even though the city and its choma was destroyed, or at least its choma was destroyed, nevertheless it still maintains its original kedusha, because kedusha rishona kidsha shaita the kidsha liasid lavo. Now the Gemara begins to darshan the psukim in the Megillah, and this is here on the top of Daf Yud Amid Beis.